Welcome everyone. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional land of the Kaurna people this evening, and Morialta is an interesting site because it's actually right on the boundary of the Kaurna people and the Paramount people. So unfortunately there's not a lot of knowledge left about what Morialta was used for, but we do know there were Indigenous people here. We would like to pay our respects to the elders past, present and up and coming, and acknowledge their strong relationship with the land. Here, the land that we're meeting on. They approve the work that we're doing. But we're here tonight to welcome Dr. Robert Cirocco. Is that correct?
Yes, Robert will be fine. Please.
This evening he's going to talk to us. Well, I call it dodder, but I believe that locals call it snotty-gobble.
It goes by many names.
I don't quite the head of you.
And actually, I wanted Jose. Jose is the leader, team leader.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah. No, some of you actually know me because Facelli, I work at the University of Adelaide in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. I just wanted to make a little bit of history because we have been working with Cassytha for over 10 years now. We started with Jenny Watling. She was the ecophysiologist at the time in the department, and she has a strong interest in parasitic plants and the physiology of the interaction. Together with that, we have John Virtue from Pest Control Authority bringing us to information that they had been often spotting Cassytha growing on invasive species, and that there were some anecdotal evidence that they seem to be having a particularly strong effect on species like Scotch broom. So that essentially triggered a research that at first was based in understanding the nature of the interaction. So actually Robert was not at the very beginning, but for quite a long period of these 12 years, I think it is. But the first things we looked at was the physiology of the plants that were infected or not, and we developed enough information now to start thinking about whether it can be used as a biological control agent, and actually looking at strategies for deployment. And we were lucky enough to get funding to support Rob in the postdoc, and that's the project he's going to be talking about. It's a spotlight is up here. Thank you.
Thanks, Jose. Thanks, Liz. Okay, thanks everyone. Just going to talk a bit about Cassytha, a parasitic plant for weed control. So just a quick introduction of myself. So I'm a plant ecophysiologist and also a bit of an ecologist as well, terrestrial. My interests are mainly in the field in the mechanisms that drive the patterns that we observe in nature, and I'll measure plant performance with my fancy gizmos and sometimes not so fancy gizmos like a balance. And it's probably maybe more like 9-10 years now working on Cassytha. Just to start off, here's a photo from one of our experiments. On your left, we have a healthy gauze. On the right is a gauze infected with Cassytha. Yeah, even without our fancy gizmos, I think we're pretty certain that the gauze infected with Cassytha isn't going to do too well into the future. Here's another photo of one of our experiments. This is looking at the impact of Cassytha on two species, gauze, the invasive weed, and also the native kangaroo thorn. In this experiment, we looked at the influence of nitrogen on the impact of Cassytha on the host. So we had kangaroo thorn and gauze with and without the vine, and also in high versus low nitrogen conditions, just to see if that may influence Cassytha's effect. Yeah, so kangaroo thorn gauze, yeah, I really can pick them. In terms of spikiness, you got that joke there. So yeah, star of the show, Cassytha pubescens.
When you made the high nitrogen environment compared to normal, how did you do that?
We gave a Hoagland solution.
A what, sorry?
Hoagland solution. So someone called Hoagland came up with this nutrient solution that was supposed to be optimal concentrations of nitrogen, phosphorus, and micronutrients and all those sort of things for plants. And the nitrogen form in that solution is calcium nitrate and potassium nitrate. And so instead of doing for the low nitrogen, we actually did no nitrogen because they're legumes and they can get nitrogen from the rhizobium. We substituted calcium nitrate and potassium nitrate for calcium chloride and potassium chloride. So yeah, so the star of the show, Cassytha pubescens. It's a native, it's a perennial, and it's found throughout southeastern Australia. As Jose said, it's a parasitic plant, and it attaches to the stem of its shrubby host. Here's a picture of those, how it attaches to the host plant with suckers called Historia. Here on the left we have Cassytha growing on native tea tree, Leptospermum mercenoides. Here's one of the suckers. And as we move across, what we have is a cross section with the Cassytha on top and the stem of a Scotch broom below. And as we move across again, we zoom in, what we have is the sucker here, and this is the parasite's penetration peg abridging the vascular tissue of the Scotch broom, and this is the area where transfer of resources from the Scotch broom to the parasite occurs. And the parasite sucks out water and nutrients so it can grow at the expense of the plant it infects. So I took some lapse time photography of the Cassytha in action. Hopefully it will work. And so this is in the glass house, and it's Cassytha growing on Cape broom. And it's a bit harder to see during the day because you've got the patchiness of the light in the glass house. But at night it's easier to see. That's one of the things that's interesting. It is actually moving at night. I mean, we put a light there just so we could see what was going on, but I don't know if it's actually responding to the light itself, so which I probably think it's not. So it's quite interesting that it is moving at night.
So it seems to be growing very quickly as well.
Yeah, well, those thicker tendrils, so it sends these tendrils up in the sky, but it also sends these thicker ones along the ground looking for new hosts, and those thicker ones seem to be the ones that are more active in the coiling, which sort of makes sense, I guess, if it's trying to find another host. The outside edges of those thicker ones seem to be more active.
So was that just like a week's worth?
I don't know. I think that might have even been like maybe 3 or 4 days.
Yeah,
Just
yeah, because
taking-
it was just sort of counting the nights where it went dark.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
it's
So
there's lots happening quite quickly.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when it's growing, it can probably grow 3 centimetres in a day maybe
Yeah.
as well, so it can grow quite rapidly. So moving on to weed control. At present, the typically adopted strategy is an integrated management plan. So you have things like mechanical removal, herbicides, slashing, burning, grazing, and biocontrol. And I guess at the start I was naive because I thought, oh, we've got all these wonderful things that we can use, you know, we can use them all at once, but it's not as easy as that, and each technique has certain times of the year or certain cases where it is effective or it isn't. And I think when we're talking biocontrols, mainly we're talking about inaccessible areas like steep slopes, really large infestations that are making it too hard basket. And if you go to the CSIRO website, it actually says the most successful method of controlling invasive weeds is biocontrol. It's the most cost-effective, environmentally friendly solution, and once established is self-sustaining and shouldn't require reapplication. At present with biocontrols, for blackberry there's 1 rust out there. For gauze and Scotch broom there's 1 seed and 3 foliage feeders. And for bone seed there's 1 seed and 2 foliage feeders. And Cassytha is a biocontrol. Where it's, well, it's a perennial, so it's in there for the long haul. From the lapse time, it looks like it's on the job 24/7. It's a native, so by rights it should require less research and money into its potential use as a biocontrol. Because it's a generalist, and because when typically with a biocontrol they introduce biocontrols, they need to be species specific. So in Cassytha's case, because it's a native and it's a generalist, it can be used for several weeds of national significance and help mitigate associated costs with them. As we found, it strongly reduces flowering, seed set, and in some cases actually may cure the plant. So, which is unlike most biocontrols, which reduce seed, reduce flowering, maybe eat the soft tissue, but don't necessarily kill the plant. So Cassytha's hosts, it's a generalist, so some of its native hosts, Leptospermum mercinoides, kangaroo thorn, Banksia marginata, and Divisia leptophylla. And some of its invasive hosts, well, gauze, blackberry, broom, a lot of those invasive shrubs. And I'm just going to show, I think, a series of graphs just to show some of the experiments that we've done. So this is an experiment where we looked at the influence of light on the association. We grew native tea tree, Leptospermum mercinoides, and gauze, with and without the vine. So along the x-axis, we have high light and low light. And this graph's for native tea tree, and the other graph is for gauze. And the white bars indicate an uninfected plant, and the grey bars indicate a Cassytha infected plant. And along the y-axis we have overall growth, and the star denotes a significant effect. So what these graphs show is that whether it was in high light or low light, it didn't matter. Cassytha didn't significantly reduce the overall growth of native tea tree, but for gauze, in high light and low light, Cassytha significantly reduced the growth of this invasive host. And actually it was quite astonishing. In high light, it reduced it by 40%, and in low light, it reduced it by 40%. And this experiment is going back to that photo I showed you all earlier, looking at the influence of nitrogen on the impact of Cassytha. And along the x-axis, here we have gauze in a high nitrogen treatment, and here gauze in a low nitrogen treatment, and here Acacia paradoxa in a high nitrogen treatment, kangaroo thorn in the low nitrogen treatment, and again uninfected plants are in the white bars, and Cassytha infected plants are in the grey bars. And we have overall growth on the y-axis. And again, it didn't matter whether it was high or low nitrogen. Cassytha significantly reduced the growth of gauze, but it didn't significantly reduce the growth of kangaroo thorn. And this is an experiment looking at water, how water influences Cassytha. And this is just for gauze. I tried a new native host, Leptospermum continentale, but it didn't become infected in the time that it took the gauze to become infected, so I don't know if there's a little bit of maybe host tolerance or resistance to the suckers forming on the continental, I'm not too sure. Along the x-axis here we have high water, and here we have low water, and again uninfected plants in the white bars and Cassytha infected plants in the grey bars. And what this graph shows is that Cassytha significantly reduced the growth of gores and in high water and low water, but it was actually had a even enhanced greater negative effect in high water conditions. So what's maybe happening is as the host gets more water, it's easier for the parasite to take more water out. So you give more water to the host plant, and Cassytha can take out that water and nutrients more easily. Whereas if you sort of stress the host plant and don't give it much water, it might hold on to that water a bit more tightly. What we found, and I haven't shown a graph of this, but we actually have found that Cassytha grows much more vigorously on the introduced hosts as well. And so what we're thinking is the suckers get embedded into the invasive hosts, and the parasite can suck more out, grow more, wrap around more, latch on more, and keep sucking, and the vicious cycle continues. Whereas I think it makes sense that the native hosts have co-evolved over time with the native Cassytha, and they build up some tolerance to the suckers getting in and being able to remove host resources. We've shown over this 10 years that Cassytha impacts the growth of the introduced but not native host studied, and the impact is independent of light and nitrogen, but water seems to have an effect. The effect is more severe in high water on gores. But as usual, there's a lot of still unknowns out there, and we're not too sure what conditions in the field Cassytha will be most effective. Water looks like maybe an important driver, so maybe in high rainfall areas it might be more effective. But as you all know, the field is a very complex environment and there's a lot of things going on. So whether that plays out in the field is yet to be determined. We're not sure how Cassytha infection interacts with other weed management practices. For example, what happens if we slash a patch and we put Cassytha on it? Will that enhance the effect of Cassytha on controlling the weeds? Following on from that, we're not sure how host size will influence Cassytha's effect. So if we put Cassytha on small gores versus a large gores, will it take much longer for it to harm the bigger gores? So maybe supplying various resources. So we've looked at light and nitrogen and water independently. What happens if we put the two together? So high water, high nitrogen, low water, high nitrogen, all those different combinations. What happens then? Because the field is, again, quite complex. It's unknown whether that vigorous growth on the introduced host, whether that can go on to swamp nearby native vegetation. Our current project is, some of the activities is field trials, so implementing Cassytha on blackberry or gores, some glass ice experiments, so growing some small gores and some big gores and seeing if Cassytha has a greater effect on one or the other. We're actually doing a big experiment looking at water and nitrogen combined and seeing how that influences the effect of the parasite. And we're also doing an experiment looking at Cassytha's growth on gores and also on native hosts, and then what happens downstream when it infects a native host, a native tea tree. Does that vigorous growth on the gores go on to swamp that tea tree, or once it hits that tea tree and it tries to latch on with the suckers, does that sort of, the suckers don't get in well and can't take much out and sort of puts that Cassytha growth in check. And also as part of the project, we've got a community component where we're asking members of the community if they want to participate in helping propagate Cassytha to expedite any future trials or experiments, and or including on maybe on their own property. I must say it's still in its infancy. We're still having been trying to grow Cassytha from seed for a while now, and it's very difficult to germinate, which is maybe a good thing. in terms of, so you sort of can't go like Jack and the Magic Beanstalk and just throw some Cassytha seeds and...
And you don't see it going mad in the bush area.
No. We
There are
have,
some places you do.
yeah, we have a student still working on her PhD, and she found substantial establishment after fires, several months after fires, which is a nifty strategy for a parasite because it allows some time for the rest of the vegetation to start to grow, their hosts, and then it germinates. But the other interesting thing is that there was very little sign of dispersal. All the seedlings were around the site where there was an infected plant. But as a practical way of propagating it, we are having a lot of trouble.
Yeah, not too bad, but it just takes a lot of time. So what I'm sort of getting at is we don't have too much material to give out at the moment, to the community, but always looking for people that want to participate, and we can put them on the list. And I mean, I think last time I looked, we have 50 plants with little Cassytha seedlings, and it's taking a long time for the Cassytha to get going from that seedling stage. Moving on, field trials, and this is one of the main reasons why I wanted to give this talk as well, is to the friends group, because we are deploying Cassytha on blackberry and Horsnell Gully, and I thought only right to give a talk and let you all know about the project and what we have planned. And there's other sites as well at Belair National Park and at Blackwood Forest Recreation Park. And I'm hoping to give a talk to their friends groups as well. I've actually been part of the Belair Friends group for a little bit now. I haven't been able to go into bush care lately, but I have spoken with them about it as well. They know a bit about the project. There's a trial implementing Cassytha at those sites, and we're also going to try that slashing activity as well. So we've slashed not a big area, 2 3x3 metre plots at Horsnell Gully and 2 3x3 metre plots at Blackwood Forest Recreation Park. And on one of those plots will be left as a control, and the other plot will put Cassytha on it, and we'll see if that enhances the effect of Cassytha and trying to control the blackberry. I'll just go into a bit of explanation on how we would try to infect the blackberry patch. What we try to do is use mother plants. So a mother plant is a plant, preferably a weed, because we know that Cassytha grows well on weed. Is a weed infected with Cassytha in a pot, and we place that next to the target weeds that we want to infect. So this is an experiment here. We've been infecting gores. So you can imagine that on this bench, it's not a bench, it's a blackberry patch. And we put this mother plant here, which is a broom infected with Cassytha. And what we'll do is we'll put those thicker active tendrils next to the stems we want to infect. And what will happen is the Cassytha will start coiling around it. And it will probably take about 3 to 4 months for its sucker to latch on. And then we'll cut the connection from that mother plant. And so here we've just got a bit more of a close-up of that tendril coming off that mother plant, and the Cassytha coiling around the stem of that gauze, or ideally the blackberry patch. So we've done it in the glasshouse, but we've never done it in the field, and so we're going to give it a go. So that's what we do. We place a mother plant, a weed growing infected with Cassytha in a pot. We prefer a weed just because it grows better on the weed. So if we put it next to the patch, at least it will grow and it will have more chance of establishing. Whereas if you have it growing on a tea tree where it doesn't grow very well, it will sort of just maybe take a very long time to start coiling around and infecting those target weeds. And we'd carefully place the tendrils next to the blackberry. Yeah, right. I'm just going to go there and just drape it over and run away. And we visit these pots once a week to water them and remove any flowers and all that. And then after 4 months or so, once those suckers have latched on, we'll cut the connection and we'll take those plants away. In terms of field trials, always keen to hear about if anyone knows of any suitable sites, or if anyone wants to be part of the helping propagate the parasite. We're always welcoming of any help or any information like that, and that's my email address. And I've got some cards as well with me as well. This is what we're aiming for, and this is a site at Crayfors, a natural infestation of Cassytha on gauze, and it's probably been growing on that gauze for about 20 years now, maybe moving at a rate of about 1 metre per year. And what you've got is this Cassytha infection front moving over this thicket of gauze, leaving dead gauze in its wake. And that's it. And thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions.